The buzzer hadn't even sounded for round two when Steve Harvey walked away from the podium, crossed to the production table and said, loud enough for every microphone in the studio to pick up, "We're not finishing this game." It was October 11th, 2024, a Friday afternoon, and a 33-year-old woman named Renee Booker from Pine Bluff, Arkansas, was standing at the contestant podium with her hand still on the buzzer, her answer still on the board. "A roof over your head," in response to, "Name something every child deserves." And she was crying. Not the kind of crying that happens on game shows when someone wins. The other kind. The silent, structural kind, where a person's face doesn't move, but water comes out of their eyes like something broke behind the wall. Steve had seen it. He'd seen it because he'd been watching Renee Booker since the moment she walked on stage 40 minutes earlier. And something about the way she stood, shoulders curled inward, weight on her back foot, hands never fully still, told him this woman was carrying something she hadn't planned to show anyone. When her answer hit the board and the audience clapped, and Renee's hand went to her mouth and her legs started shaking, Steve didn't wait for the round to finish. He didn't wait for the points to tally. He looked at the board, looked at Renee, and walked away from the game. The opposing family, the Nakamura family from Sacramento, watched him cross the stage. Tom Nakamura, the father, said later, "I knew right then the game was over, and I was glad." The producers were not glad. The stage managers signaled for Steve to return to position. Steve said, "We're not finishing this game. Get me a chair." 2 chairs were brought to center stage. Steve sat in one and pointed Renee toward the other and said, "Sit down and tell me everything." Renee Booker sat down on national television and told Steve Harvey a story that would shut down the entire taping day. 4 remaining episodes canceled and be watched by 340 million people within 2 weeks. And that wasn't even the part that made Steve cry. Renee Elaine Booker was born on December 12, 1990, in a hospital in Pine Bluff, Arkansas, that closed 3 years later. Her mother, Claudette, was a home health aide. Her father, Reginald, worked maintenance at the paper mill on the south end of town until it downsized in 1998 and let him go with 2 weeks' severance and a form letter thanking him for 11 years of service. Reginald found work driving a truck for a feed company in Stuttgart, 45 miles each way. He drove that route every day for 6 years until his back gave out, and he couldn't sit in the cab for more than 20 minutes without his left leg going numb. He filed for disability. The claim took 14 months to process. During those 14 months, Claudette's income, $13.10 an hour, 32 hours a week because the agency wouldn't give her full time, was the only money coming in. Renee was 13. She started working at a chicken restaurant on Main Street after school, bussing tables and mopping floors for $5.15 an hour, cash, off the books. She gave every dollar to Claudette. She told her friends at school she was saving for a car. She was not saving for a car. She was buying groceries. Pine Bluff, Arkansas, in 2003, was a city in the middle of losing itself. The paper mill was shrinking. The downtown was hollowing out. The population had dropped by 8,000 in a decade. The houses on Renee's block, Walnut Street, between 28th and 29th, were worth less each year. The Booker house was a 3-bedroom frame house that Claudette's mother had owned since 1971. It was paid off, which was the only reason they kept it, because in Pine Bluff in 2003, a paid-off house wasn't wealth. It was the difference between poverty with an address and poverty without one. Renee graduated from Pine Bluff High School in 2009. She enrolled at the University of Arkansas at Pine Bluff on a Pell Grant. She lasted 3 semesters. In her second year, Claudette's hours were cut again. The agency restructured, moved her to on-call status, which meant she worked when they called, and they didn't always call. Renee dropped out in February 2011 to work full-time. She got a job at a distribution warehouse on the edge of town, packing boxes, 12-hour shifts, $11 an hour. She told Claudette she was taking a break from school. She told herself she'd go back. She has not gone back. Her son, Jalen, was born on August 8, 2015. His father, a man named Corey, was present for the pregnancy and gone by the 3rd month. Not gone the way people sometimes go, with arguments, with explanations, with the slow bleeding out of a relationship. Gone the way a light goes off. One day he was there. The next day his number was disconnected and his apartment was empty. And a neighbor said he'd moved to Dallas or maybe Houston, and nobody was sure. Renee called him 14 times over 2 weeks. Each call went to a recording that said the number was no longer in service. She stopped calling on the 15th day and never called again. She put Jalen's crib in her bedroom at the house on Walnut Street and went back to work 8 days after giving birth because the warehouse didn't offer maternity leave, and 8 days was all her body and her savings account could afford. Her daughter, Melody, was born on February 14, 2018, Valentine's Day, which Renee later said was God's idea of a joke, giving her a baby on a holiday about love when the baby's father, a man named Darnell, had told her 3 weeks before the due date that he wasn't ready to be someone's father and moved to Memphis. Renee didn't chase Darnell. She didn't call him 14 times. She called him once, told him the baby was coming, and when he said, "I can't do this," she said, "I know," and hung up. She bought a second crib at a yard sale for $30. She put it next to Jalen's. The bedroom was too small for 2 cribs and a bed, so Renee moved her mattress to the living room floor and slept there for the next 2 years. But the real story hadn't even started yet. In March 2022, Claudette had a stroke. Massive. Left hemisphere. She was 59 years old. She survived, but the damage was severe. Partial paralysis on her right side, limited speech, inability to perform basic self-care. She was discharged from Jefferson Regional Medical Center after 11 days with a care plan that required 24-hour supervision, physical therapy 3 times a week, and a medication regimen of 9 prescriptions. The physical therapy was covered by Medicare. The medications were partially covered. The 24-hour supervision was not covered by anyone or anything. Renee quit the warehouse. She had to. There was no one else. Reginald had died in 2019. Heart attack, 61 years old, sitting in his recliner on a Tuesday evening watching Wheel of Fortune. Renee's only sibling, a brother named Terrence, was in the army, stationed in Germany. He sent $400 a month when he could. It wasn't always possible. Renee became her mother's full-time caregiver. She fed Claudette. She bathed her. She dressed her. She administered 9 medications at 6 different times throughout the day, using a chart she'd taped to the refrigerator with color-coded sticky notes, because the dosing schedule was too complex to keep in her head. She lifted her mother from bed to wheelchair, wheelchair to toilet, toilet to wheelchair, wheelchair to bed. 4 transfers a day, each one requiring core strength that Renee's body learned to produce the way bodies do when there is no other option. She applied for Medicaid home care assistance. The application required documentation of Claudette's functional limitations, physician certification, proof of Renee's caregiver status, financial records, and a home assessment. She submitted everything. The response arrived 9 weeks later. Application under review. Estimated processing time, 90 to 120 days. Renee called the office. A caseworker told her the backlog was due to staffing shortages. Renee asked what she was supposed to do for 4 months. The caseworker said, "Continue providing care and contact us if your situation changes." Renee hung up and sat on the living room floor, on the mattress where she'd slept for 2 years when the children were small, and stared at the color-coded chart on the refrigerator and thought about the word situation, how it made everything sound temporary when nothing about her life had been temporary in a very long time. And that wasn't even the part that made Steve cry. Without the warehouse income, Renee's only money was Reginald's survivor benefits, $782 a month, and the $400 from Terrence when it came, $1,182 a month. Mortgage was zero, the house was paid off, but property taxes were $940 a year. Homeowners insurance was $620. Electricity averaged $130 a month. Water and sewer averaged $55. Claudette's medications, after Medicare and supplemental coverage, still cost Renee $218 a month in co-pays. Food for 4 people, Renee, Claudette, Jalen, and Melody, cost at the absolute minimum $460 a month, and that was with Renee eating once a day and buying nothing that wasn't rice, beans, chicken thighs, bread, peanut butter, or whatever produce was marked down at the Kroger on Olive Street. She did the math every month on the back of Jalen's homework because she didn't buy notepads. Every month, the math was short, sometimes by $40, sometimes by $120. She made up the difference by selling things: a lamp, a set of dishes, a winter coat she'd had since college, Reginald's tools from the garage, one by one, each one leaving the house lighter and emptier. She told Jalen and Melody that Grandma was getting better. She told Claudette that the Medicaid application was being processed. She told Terrence on their monthly phone calls that everything was under control. She told the congregation at New Hope Missionary Baptist Church that God was providing. She lied to every person who loved her because the truth was a number that got smaller every month, and a house that got emptier every week, and a body that was failing, not Claudette's body, her own, from the lifting and the sleeplessness and the single meal a day and the weight of carrying 3 lives on a frame that had never been given permission to rest. Melody, who was 6, asked Renee one evening in August 2024 why they never ate together anymore. Renee said she'd already eaten. Melody said, "No, you didn't, Mama. You always say that, but I never see you eat." Renee looked at her daughter, 6 years old, Valentine's Day baby, sharp in the way that children of struggling parents are always sharp because survival makes observers of everyone. And Renee said, "I eat when you're asleep." Melody said, "Is there enough food for you too, or just for us?" Renee couldn't answer. She turned to the sink and ran the water so Melody wouldn't see her face. Steve would later call what happened next the most important moment of his career. Renee's childhood friend, a woman named Tanya Davis, submitted the Booker family for Family Feud. The team was Renee, Tanya, Renee's cousin Bernard, Bernard's wife Kim, and Tanya's sister Patricia. Tanya didn't tell Renee why she did it. She just told her they were going on television and she needed to find something to wear. Renee wore a dress from a thrift store. She wore her mother's earrings, small gold studs that Claudette couldn't put on herself anymore. She left Jalen and Melody with Tanya's mother. She left Claudette with a church volunteer named Sister Diane, who agreed to stay overnight. She flew to Atlanta on the cheapest ticket Tanya could find and slept on Tanya's hotel room floor. because they could only afford one room. What Renee did not know was that Tanya had included a letter with the application. The letter was 4 pages long. Tanya had written it at 3 in the morning because she couldn't sleep, because she had gone to Renee's house the week before and opened the refrigerator and found 1 jar of peanut butter, a half-empty gallon of milk, and a bag of rice. That was it. That was the entire contents of the refrigerator. The letter told every detail of Renee's life. Claudette's stroke, the warehouse, the Medicaid backlog, the co-pays, the math on the back of Jalen's homework, the selling of Reginald's tools, the mattress on the living room floor, the single meal a day. A producer read the letter. That producer cried. That producer walked the letter to the executive producer. The executive producer called Steve Harvey. The Booker family played against the Nakamura family from Sacramento. Round 1 went normally. Renee was quiet but quick. Her answers were precise. Steve noticed the way she stood, shoulders curled, weight back, hands never still. He noticed the thrift store dress. He noticed the earrings that were too old for her face. He noticed the way she smiled at exactly the right moments, and the way the smile stopped the instant the camera moved away from her, like a light switched off to save electricity. Round 2. Name something every child deserves. Renee hit the buzzer first. She said, "A roof over your head." The answer was on the board, number 3. The audience clapped, and Renee Booker's hand went to her mouth, and her eyes filled, and her body started shaking, and the smile didn't come this time because there was nothing left to switch on. Steve watched it happen. He didn't wait for the points. He didn't wait for the next question. He walked away from the podium. He crossed to production. He said, "We're not finishing this game." He brought 2 chairs to center stage. He sat. He pointed to the other chair. Renee sat. "Tell me everything," Steve said. The studio fell completely silent. Renee told him. All of it. The stroke, the warehouse, the Medicaid wait, the co-pays, the math, the tools, the refrigerator, the 1 meal a day. She told him about the mattress on the living room floor. She told him about the 9 medications and the color-coded chart. She told him about lifting her mother 4 times a day. She told him about Melody asking if there was enough food for her too. She said it all in a voice that was flat, controlled, exhausted. The voice of a woman who had run out of the energy required to perform wellness, and was simply reporting facts, the way a person reads a grocery list. Steve didn't interrupt. He didn't react. He sat in the chair and listened with his hands on his knees and his eyes on Renee's face. And when she finished, when the last fact left her and her body settled into the chair like it was the first time she'd sat down in 2 years, the studio was so silent that the air conditioning was audible. Steve said, "How long since you ate today?" Renee said, "I had coffee this morning." Steve said, "That's not food." Renee said, "I know." Steve stood up. He looked at the production team. He said, "Cancel the rest of the day, every taping, all of them." He looked at the stage manager. "Get this woman a meal, right now, not craft services, real food, a plate, a chair, silverware, get it now." A producer brought a plate of food from a restaurant across the street from the studio within 12 minutes. Steve Harvey sat on the stage of Family Feud next to Renee Booker and watched her eat. The cameras rolled. 206 audience members sat in silence and watched a woman eat a plate of grilled chicken and rice and green beans on national television. And not one person spoke, because every person in that room understood that they were witnessing something that should never have to happen on a game show stage. A mother being fed. When Renee put the fork down, Steve said, "Let me tell you something." The studio fell completely silent again. "I know what it's like to not eat," Steve said. I lived in my car for 3 years. My 1976 Ford Tempo. I went days without a real meal. I ate things I don't talk about. And the worst part, the very worst part, wasn't the hunger. It was sitting in that car knowing my children were eating somewhere and I wasn't the one feeding them. That eats you from the inside. Not the hunger, the knowing. Steve paused. You have been feeding 3 people on $1,100 a month. You have been lifting your mother 4 times a day. You have been selling your dead father's tools to buy groceries. And you told your daughter you eat when she's sleeping because you didn't want her to know there wasn't enough. Steve's voice cracked. You are not failing, you hear me? You are performing a miracle every single day, on no sleep and no food and no help and no money. That is not failure. That is the most extraordinary thing I have ever seen a human being do. And it stops today. But Steve wasn't done. He asked for a phone. A producer was already holding one. Steve dialed a number on speaker. He called the director of the Arkansas Department of Human Services, Division of Medical Services. This is Steve Harvey. I'm on the stage of Family Feud with a woman named Renee Booker from Pine Bluff, Arkansas. Her mother, Claudette Booker, had a massive stroke in 2022 and requires 24-hour care. Renee has been providing that care alone for over 2 years. She applied for Medicaid home care assistance and was told to wait 90 to 120 days. It has been 7 months. She has received no response. Her case number is… Steve looked at Renee. She recited it from memory. She had memorized it because she'd called the office so many times the numbers were burned into her brain. I need this case reviewed and approved by Monday. Not next month. Monday. Can you make that happen? The director said she would personally ensure the case was prioritized and reviewed. But Steve wasn't done. He made a second call. He called the president of a national nonprofit that provides emergency financial assistance to family caregivers. I need a full support package for this family. Grocery delivery, utility coverage, respite care so this woman can sleep. A home health aide 3 days a week minimum. Everything she needs to stop doing this alone. I'll fund the first year myself. Can your organization coordinate it? The president said yes. But Steve wasn't done. He turned to the Nakamura family. He looked at Tom Nakamura, who was standing at the opposing podium with his wife Akiko and their 3 adult children. Tom, we didn't finish the game. I'm going to ask you what I should do about that. Tom Nakamura didn't hesitate. Give her the money. Give her whatever you were going to give us. She needs it more. Akiko Nakamura nodded. Their son David said, We came here to play a game. She came here to survive. That's not even a question. Steve looked at Tom Nakamura for a long time. Then he said, I'm not taking your money. I'm giving her the $20,000, and I'm giving you $20,000. Both families win. Because the Nakamura family just did something I will never forget. You gave up your prize for a stranger without blinking. That's not losing. That's the most winning thing I've ever seen on this stage. The audience rose to their feet. The applause lasted over 5 minutes. Renee Booker was sitting in the chair on center stage with an empty plate beside her and tears running down her face and both hands pressed flat against her stomach. Not because it hurt, but because it was full, and she couldn't remember the last time it was full. Steve looked into the camera. Everyone watching at home, I canceled a game show today. I stopped the game. I stopped it because a woman answered a question about what every child deserves, and she said, a roof over your head. And her voice broke because she has been one missed payment from losing hers. There are 9 million family caregivers in this country. 9 million people doing what Renee does: lifting, feeding, medicating, bathing, staying awake, selling their belongings, skipping meals, lying to their children about eating when they sleep. The system calls them informal caregivers. Informal. As if what they do is casual. As if what they do doesn't cost them their jobs, their health, their sleep, their food, and their future. There is nothing informal about a woman lifting her mother from a wheelchair to a bed 4 times a day on a body running on coffee and peanut butter. Call it what it is. Call it heroic. And then ask yourself what you're doing about it. The clip was uploaded before midnight. It reached 210 million views in 34 hours. Within 11 days, it passed 420 million. The hashtag #CancelTheGame trended in 55 countries. The Arkansas Department of Human Services approved Claudette Booker's Medicaid home care application 4 days after the taping. A home health aide began visiting the house on Walnut Street 3 times a week, starting November 1st. The Kroger on Olive Street in Pine Bluff, after an employee shared the clip internally, partnered with a regional food bank to deliver weekly grocery boxes to the Booker home at no cost. The arrangement was made permanent within 2 months and was expanded to 47 other caregiver households in Jefferson County. The Cancel the Game Foundation was incorporated in December 2024. In its first year, it provided emergency financial support to over 600 family caregivers across 14 states, covering groceries, utilities, medication copays, respite care, and home modifications. It created a caregiver crisis hotline, staffed 20 hours a day, that connected overwhelmed family caregivers with immediate local resources. It partnered with 9 state Medicaid agencies to pilot an expedited review program for home care applications that had exceeded 90-day processing windows. By the end of the second year, average processing times in participating states had dropped from 114 days to 38. The foundation lobbied successfully in 4 states for legislation reclassifying family caregivers as essential care providers, a designation that unlocked access to respite care funding and caregiver tax credits. In an interview 12 months after the episode, Steve Harvey said, "People ask me why I stopped the game. They say I could have let her play, let her win, let the show do what shows do. And I tell them, the game was already over. It was over the second she said, 'A roof over your head.' And her face told me that answer wasn't about a game show question. It was about her life. She was answering from the inside of her own survival. And I'm not going to stand behind a podium and pretend that's entertainment. That's a woman drowning in front of 200 people, and I was not going to read the next question." Renee Booker still lives in the house on Walnut Street in Pine Bluff. The house is paid off. It will always be paid off. The property taxes are current. The refrigerator is full. A home health aide named Francine comes Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. On those days, Renee sleeps. She sleeps like a person who has forgotten how and is teaching herself again. Fitfully at first, then deeper, then so deeply that Jalen has to shake her awake for dinner, which is a sentence Renee never imagined being true. She eats now, 3 meals a day. She sits at the table with Jalen, who is 9, and Melody, who is 7, and Claudette, who is in her wheelchair at the head of the table because Renee insists that the person who held this family together for 30 years gets the best seat, even if she can't hold a fork with her right hand anymore. Renee cuts Claudette's food. Melody pours her water. Jalen tells jokes. Terrible jokes. 9-year-old jokes. Jokes so bad that Claudette laughs with the left side of her face, which is the side that still works. which is enough. Terence came home from Germany on leave in January 2025. He walked into the house on Walnut Street and opened the refrigerator and stood in front of it for a long time. Renee asked what he was doing. He said, "Looking at it." She said, "Looking at what?" He said, "All the food." He closed the refrigerator door and pulled his sister into his chest and held her, and neither of them said anything because the sight of a full refrigerator in the house on Walnut Street said everything that needed to be said. A woman sits in a chair on a stage, eating a plate of grilled chicken and rice and green beans. The cameras are rolling. The audience is silent. A game show has been cancelled. 4 tapings, gone. The schedule, abandoned. The points, meaningless. And a woman is eating, slowly, carefully, with silverware and a real plate on a game show stage in Atlanta, Georgia, because a man looked at her face and saw what nobody else had seen, that her answer wasn't an answer. It was a confession. Every child deserves a roof over their head. Every mother deserves a plate of food. Every caregiver deserves a chair. And sometimes the most important thing a game show can do is stop being a game show and start being a kitchen table where somebody who has been standing for 2 years can finally sit down. If this story made you see someone you know, subscribe and turn on notifications. We're here every week, telling the stories that stop the game.